remains the only option, unlike those who voiced the US position, which says all options are on the table. We believe the only way is to respect the UN Charter, preserve peace in Venezuela, and not violent or forceful overthrow of the regime.
Meanwhile, Venezuelan soldiers have been making a display of their loyalty to President Maduro, burning a copy of a letter from opposition leader Juan Guaido handed to them by some of his supporters. Earlier, Vladimir Putin discussed the Venezuelan crisis with Donald Trump by phone, with the U.S. president saying the chat with his Russian counterpart had been positive. RT's Ilya Petrenko has more on that and efforts to break Venezuela's deadlock.
What if all the key stakeholders don't only talk on the phone, but get to meet? Maybe even more than once and actually end up agreeing on something. Mike Pompeo and Sergei Lavrov don't get in touch that often nowadays, but just last week they were on the phone, and there you have it, they're meeting face to face just a few days after. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump didn't talk for about 5 months after the G20 in Argentina. Last week, it was time to get back to business. The two presidents were on the phone for more than an hour.
He is not looking at all to get involved in Venezuela, other than he'd like to see something positive happen for Venezuela. And I feel the same way. So we want to help on a humanitarian basis. And I thought it was a very positive conversation I had with President Putin on Venezuela.
Sounds quite optimistic, probably even too much. Was President Putin able to convince him speculation over Russia's involvement in Venezuela is way too overblown? Wait, only the day before we heard this from America's #1 diplomat.
We need to make sure there's not an invasion in Venezuela, and yet there's been one. It took place. The Cubans invaded some time ago. The Russians have now followed suit.
And in the meantime, Mr. Lavrov was saying this.
We've agreed to keep discussing the situation in Venezuela, but I don't see how we can find a common approach when our policy is based on the principles of international law. And the US line is to appoint someone as an interim president in another country, threaten to use military force along with choking sanctions to overthrow the current regime.
Washington is trying to convince the world the way they've been pulling the strings in Venezuela has nothing to do with the word coup. Yet, as usual, they're leaving all options on the table, including the use of force.
Military action is possible if that's what's required. That's what the United States will do.
Particularly those who are not Venezuelan should know is all options are on the table.
Secretary of State is in close contact with the Pentagon. He was among the officials who were briefed by U.S. Southern Command, quote unquote, on a wide range of military options as the command continues to monitor activities on the ground in Venezuela. Self-imposed Venezuelan leader Juan Guaido has been hinting he'd be happy if Washington stepped in militarily.
I do not rule out a military intervention because it's entirely clear what the Maduro regime is about.
Anyway, it's clear for him that would probably be the best case scenario after several failed attempts to get the army on his side. Juan Guaido called himself the president of Venezuela 3.5 months ago, and time isn't on his side. Giving out orders as head of state hasn't yet helped him actually become one. President Nicolas Maduro and his supporters have so far been able to withstand most of the pressure. A few more failed attempts to start a coup or energize a genuinely nationwide protest may lead to second thoughts about Mr. Guaido within the opposition. Whether he'll ever choose to back down himself, that's a tough one. Speaking of Nicolas Maduro, this man doesn't look like someone who'll ever be the first one to raise the white flag. Making concessions, though, when he's completely pushed to the wall, that's more like it.